Hello judges, fellow capstone presenters, classmates, haters and lovers of Shakespeare. My name is Venus Mairena and this is my 2023 capstone research. So I decided to do my research on the femininity and androgyny, as well as just gender roles and how they are portrayed in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Just a quick little overview for those of you that may be unfamiliar with Macbeth because you haven't read it or haven't studied it in a while. The play goes that three witches prophesize that the Scottish general Macbeth will become King of Scotland. Gaslit and manipulated by his wife Lady Macbeth, Macbeth kills the king, becomes the new king, and kills more people, including Banquo, his best pal, out of paranoia. Civil war then erupts to overthrow Macbeth, which results in more death and ultimately Macbeth's demise. Part of my motivation for this research is to show that queer and genderqueer people have existed for a long time. Gender is a spectrum that can have specific points. We will get into that a little later. And I just wanted to show that even in literature from over 400 years ago, that has been portrayed and that has been shown. I use a critically queer lens to analyze the characters, their behavior, dialogue, and appearance to gain further insight into Macbeth and how it battles and enforces stereotypical gender roles. So, while I was doing my research, my original research question actually changed. So my original research question was how Shakespeare himself wrote Macbeth to villainize androgyny and femininity, but as I was doing my research, my questions changed. So my questions that I used for the research that I will be presenting were: how did Shakespeare's Macbeth demonize femininity and androgyny, and how does this relate to Lady Macbeth's lack of power? When Lady Macbeth is portrayed in a lot of popular media, we see her as the most powerful and manipulative character. Even when she is mentioned in very popular TV shows nowadays, like Pretty Little Liars or Riverdale, she is seen as the one that has all of the control, when in reality, she doesn't, because of her femininity and because of her womanhood. Research methods. So my research methods included a close reading of the text while adding my own interpretation to the text, backed up with evidence from other scholars. I also included historical facts about society in the Elizabethan era to back what Shakespeare was trying to say. In my research, I found that the play was written to criticize the gender roles of that time. So it hyperbolizes all of these gender norms that were portrayed onto feminine and masculine people and emphasizes them to kind of ridicule how those gender norms work in that society. The clear division between femininity and masculinity, along with the refusal to accept androgyny, is ultimately what leads to Macbeth and in turn Lady Macbeth's downfall. The characters in the play view gender as absolute as opposed to fluid, which creates a lot of limitations in their character growth and creates an unhealthy sense of machismo, which criticizes the hypermasculinity of the Elizabethan era. As previously stated, I wanted to conduct this study because I wanted to show that queer people, queer values, and queer identities were present long before it was accepted as normal in society. We are still a long ways away from reaching equality between queer people and cis people, but researching Shakespeare's Macbeth gave me an insight onto the fact that non-binary, androgynous, transgender people existed way before we were taught they were. We've always been around. I would say my biggest limitation in the study was the lack of queer studies and analysis done during the Elizabethan era, because back then being queer, gay, transgender, anything under the rainbow was considered taboo. So there was no studies done. Society back then was also heavily influenced by religion, and religion viewed queerness as taboo as well. Some of the things that I will cover in this presentation are terminology and how definitions have evolved throughout time as languages evolved, the difference between femininity and womanhood, the difference between masculinity and manhood, the whole of androgyny, and the anema and anemas as defined by Carl Jung psychology. this research project is English literature based, but I have also done a lot of research and studies when it comes to the evolution of language, which really worked out in my favor when I was doing my research on Macbeth, because the terminology and the evolution of definitions heavily contributed to the interpretation of Macbeth. So in the Elizabethan era, the terms gender and sex were interchangeable. There was no clear definition between gender, which is a societal construct, and sex, which is biological and assigned at birth. This led to a lot of confusions and limitations for the characters and for the people living in the Elizabethan era. So, what is masculinity? What is femininity? Many of us have not bothered to ask ourselves these questions or find a more in-depth answer because we think the answer is obvious to us. And while it may be obvious to most of us, or some of us now as our education has increased greatly, in the Elizabethan era, which is when Macbeth was written, it was not such an easy answer. As our education and our knowledge continues to progress, it is important that we apply our new foundings onto old and past literary works that still are relevant to societal standards today, so that their meanings and their implications may evolve with us. Mahalo nui loa, and I hope you enjoy my presentation.